I had no idea when I moved into my grandfather's cabin trying to escape the madness of life that it would lead me straight into a battle with the most dangerous kind of villain, a neighbor. More specifically, the HOA president. If I had known, maybe I would have packed my bags and left the minute I saw her, Brenda Thornfield. But hindsight, well, it's always 2020, isn't it? Let me take you back to the beginning of this nightmare. Have you ever caught someone red-handed doing something so brazen that you think, there's no way they can get away with this? Well, that's exactly what happened when I discovered Brenda was stealing electricity from my grandfather's cabin. And I'm not talking about a few stolen watts. No, she was running illegal power lines feeding her entire mansion for 8 months using our electricity. It didn't stop there. She wasn't just draining our power, she was also issuing fake violation notices trying to bleed us dry. Meanwhile, she was powering her heated driveway, grow lights, you name it. And when I finally confronted her about it, her response was chilling. No apology, no remorse, just a cold escalation. She cut power to my 89-year-old grandfather's oxygen machine during a February blizzard. The worst part, she had the audacity to call 911 on me, accusing me of stealing electricity and threatening a disabled veteran. I was furious. But when I found my grandfather gasping for air, his oxygen machine silent in the freezing cold, something inside me snapped. That was the moment I realized she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. That night I made a promise to myself. I would show Brenda who truly owned the power around here. But first, let me tell you a bit about myself and why this fight meant more than just electricity. I'm Samuel Gallagher, an electrical engineer. I inherited my grandfather's cabin, hoping it would be the peaceful retreat I needed. But instead, it became the battleground in a war I never asked for. My grandfather Walter built that cabin in 1952 on 5 acres of pristine Colorado land. And Walter wasn't just a builder, he was one of the founding members of the rural electrification project that brought power to this valley. This place meant everything to me. After my divorce, it became my sanctuary, my refuge. Every weekend I'd drive up from Denver with Walter, who at 89 still had a passion for teaching. We'd run workshops for kids, teaching them about solar power circuit design, anything to get them interested in the trades. Walter's stories about building things that would last echoed in those mountains, and the kids' laughter filled the air. It was paradise. But that paradise was about to be overtaken by Pinner Ridge Commons, a sprawling development of 200 cookie-cutter homes, all beige siding, black shutters, and perfectly manicured lawns, and the queen of this beige empire, Brenda Thornfield. Imagine a woman who drove a white BMW, carried a clipboard like a scepter, and had never done an honest day's work in her life. She'd been the HOA president for 3 years, and she ruled over the neighborhood with a set of rules that only she seemed to enforce. And trust me, they weren't about community. They were about controlling people and making sure her property values stayed high. Brenda's McMansion was the crown jewel of the community, sitting at the entrance like a symbol of her power. A heated driveway, grow lights blazing in every window, enough outdoor lighting to guide aircraft in for a landing. And she had the nerve to criticize my cabin for not fitting into her suburban fantasy. She'd come to my porch one October morning, clipboard in hand, to inform me that my rustic cabin was a violation of community standards. She wanted me to paint it beige to make it blend in with the others. I had enough. This cabin was here before your HOA ever existed, I told her. And it's staying just the way it is. Her response was to threaten me with daily fines, starting at $100 and escalating to $500. She handed me violation notices like they were nothing. But something in her demeanor caught my attention. The hum of overloaded transformers, the smell of diesel exhaust in the air, it didn't make sense. A few weeks later, I discovered the truth. Brenda had been siphoning electricity from the community grid to power her mansion. And she wasn't just stealing electricity, she was covering it up, using her position to harass anyone who didn't fit her mold. When I tried to confront her, she escalated. That's when I started documenting everything. I found the smoking gun in the form of a thick orange extension cord running from the community junction box straight to her house. Brenda was stealing power, and she was doing it at the expense of every homeowner in the neighborhood. But it wasn't enough to simply know what she was doing, I needed to prove it. I began researching property records, diving deep into the history of the land. What I found was a revelation. My grandfather had retained specific easements and rights that no HOA bylaw could override. This cabin wasn't just any property, it had protections built into the original agreement's protections that Brenda couldn't touch. I documented her violations, took photos, and gathered evidence. But Brenda wasn't done yet. She launched a psychological war, filing complaints about my educational workshops, claiming I was running an illegal business. When the county inspector showed up, he found everything was above board. Not only that, but he was so impressed with my work that he recommended I apply for official educational certification. Brenda wasn't finished, though. She organized a so-called safety committee meeting to rally the community against me. She painted me as a danger to the neighborhood, accusing me of running a hazardous operation with unsafe conditions. But the more she pushed, the more people started to see through her lies. Dorothy Vance, a retired teacher, filled me in on Brenda's antics. Brenda even went so far as to accuse my grandfather's old wiring of being a fire hazard. It was clear now Brenda was trying to cover up her theft. She wasn't just after my cabin. She wanted to make sure I didn't have the power to fight back. But I wasn't backing down. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, documenting her every move, every violation. And then one night I caught her. I was in my workshop when I noticed Brenda and two board members sneaking around my property, taking photos and documenting everything like they were conducting an inspection. When I confronted them, Brenda tried to claim she had the right to inspect my property without my permission. That's when I brought out my secret weapon, a teenager named Jake Morrison, one of my students. Jake stepped out of the workshop holding a GFCI outlet in his hand. "Should I call the county inspector who was here last month?" he asked, his voice loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. The look on Brenda's face was priceless. She froze. She had no idea I had witnesses. But I wasn't done. I kept digging. I found out Brenda wasn't just stealing from me. She was stealing from the community's utility company, and she had been for months. I had the evidence, the photos, and the legal documents. It was time to bring it all to light. The twist: I wasn't just a victim in this case. My grandfather had been a founding member of the utility company that powered the entire development. I was a major shareholder. Brenda was stealing electricity not only from me, but from the very company that had been in my family for generations. The final twist came when I gathered enough evidence to call in the authorities. The FBI, the utility company, and local law enforcement all got involved. Brenda's world was about to collapse. And collapse it did. The day of the HOA meeting, the entire community showed up to hear the truth. Brenda tried to smear me on live television, calling it a fake emergency to discredit me. But what she didn't know was that the news crews she invited to cover her fake emergency would soon be covering her downfall. When the truth came out, the entire room was in shock. Brenda Thornfield had been stealing power from her own utility company, and I, Samuel Gallagher, was the person who could legally shut off her electricity. She'd harassed me, tried to ruin my life, and nearly killed my grandfather, but in the end she couldn't escape the truth. The community rallied behind me, and Brenda was arrested on federal charges. Her McMansion was seized, and she faced a long prison sentence. But the real victory wasn't just about the legal battle, it was about restoring justice to a community that had been manipulated for too long. And that's how a promise made to a dying wife, a legacy passed down through generations, and a battle fought for what's right turned into something far bigger than I could have imagined. The real power, as it turns out, wasn't in the electricity, it was in standing up for what's right no matter the cost. So let me ask you this. What would you have done? Would you have stood up to someone like Brenda? Or would you have let her walk all over you? The choice is yours, and remember, sometimes the smallest spark can ignite the biggest fire.